Welcome to Coast Talks. My name's Julie Angus, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Open Ocean Robotics, a marine robotics company here in Victoria, BC. And I'm also on the advisory board of Coast. And I'm opening today's event from the territories of the Lekwungen peoples, today known as the Esquimalt and the Songhees nations. Coast is committed to working with First Nations and to respecting their long-standing relationships to the lands and waters. Coast recognizes the leadership of Indigenous peoples as innovators and stewards of these territories. I invite everyone joining us today to take a moment to reflect on the territory from which you are joining today's conversation. And I'd also like to encourage you to introduce yourself through the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. Now, for those of you new to Coast Talks, COAST stands for the Center for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technologies, a new blue tech innovation hub based in Victoria, BC. COAST's mission is to drive inclusive prosperity in British Columbia's sustainable blue economy through entrepreneurship, innovation, and expansive partnerships. The Coast Talks series was launched to showcase some of the organizations, innovators, and companies working hard to build a sustainable ocean future. Today's Coast Talk is the first for Season 2. And you can sign up for upcoming talks on our website, canadacoast.ca, and you can also view past talks there as well as on YouTube. So today's talk is about we're diving into the global ocean observation systems and opportunities for Pacific Canada. From rising sea levels to decreasing oxygen levels, changes to our oceans affect everything from weather patterns to commerce to the ability of the planet to sustain life. And that's why the monitoring of our oceans and collaborating to share data is critical to understanding and mitigating these changes and to enabling a global sustainable blue economy. And today we're joined by an exceptional panel of local and global ocean observation experts. We'll explore Pacific Canada's need for an ocean observation solution that allows systems and data to talk to each other to provide an integrated picture of what's happening in our oceans. And we'll explore how we bypass barriers to progress and create collaborative opportunities for success. And so I'm very delighted to be able to moderate this discussion with our three panelists who will lead us off with short presentations followed by a moderated discussion. And we will be taking your questions, so please submit them anytime through the Zoom Q&A. And the session is recorded, and you can also submit your questions anonymously if you would prefer. So first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Denis D'Amours, who is currently the Executive Director of the Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System, CIOOS, Pacific, located at Ocean Networks Canada. Previously, he was the Director of the Canadian Hydrographic Service at DFO's Institute of Ocean Sciences, CIOOS, in Sydney. Denis has over 30 years of experience in the management and practice of ocean science in Canada's 3 oceans and enjoys contributing to the Canadian effort in making ocean data around the country findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Thank you, Denis.
Thank you, Julie. I am actually joining you from near Pat Bay in North Saanich, and I'm almost immediate neighbor to the second First Nation. I would like to get to the slides, please. The next slide, yes. I want to thank ABCMI, SIP, and COAST for this opportunity to introduce the Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System, CIOOS. CIOOS, as we chose to pronounce it to rhyme with the rest of the world. So to introduce CIOOS to the wider marine sector in the Pacific region. CIOOS was launched in January 2019 and has been funded by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, MEOPAR, which is a national network of excellence, and the Tuala Foundation, an independent charitable foundation. In short, CIOOS is meant to integrate ocean observation in Canada I'll summarize how we intend to do that in the next 10 slides. Next slide, please. So first question, where does CIOOS fit among other observing systems elsewhere in the world? You can see on this map the geographic coverage of other ocean observing systems over the world ocean. For example, one such system is CIOOS over the United States. Another one is IMOS over Australia. And yet another one is EuroGoose over Europe, which, by the way, includes a consortium of 18 countries, and so on and so on. So these observing systems that cover the world ocean, some of them have been in existence for a decade or two. Their main goal is to integrate ocean data in response to a variety of requirements. Next slide, please. Here in Canada, our ocean observing system is made up of 3 regional associations, one in the Atlantic, one in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and one here in the Pacific region. Each of these 3 regional associations is developing web platforms and tools to visualize, search, and filter data sets, all with the same formats and same standards. Each platform is accessible via the others, and they are thus interoperable. Next slide, please. Now a little more focus on the CIOOS Pacific Regional Association. From the very beginning, the main partners or the founding partners for the association have been the Hawkeye Institute, which is a division of the Tula Foundation, and the University of University of Victoria's Ocean Network Canada, ONC. Both of these partners, Hawkeye and ONC, operate state-of-the-art ocean observing systems and have expertise in advanced ocean data management. So what have we been doing in this partnership since January 2019 with ocean observation in the Pacific? Next slide, please. This slide is a description of what the situation was before CIOOS. Before CIOOS, this very busy slide illustrates the abundance of observing activities, systems, and organizations in the Pacific Ocean. Numerous institutions have been creating data holdings in variable formats and with different standards. As a result, before CIOOS, we had lots of data, but it was very fragmented. So how do we start to resolve the problem of data fragmentation? Next slide, please. So one of the very important tools currently under development is the CIOOS Data Explorer. With the CIOOS Data Explorer, one will be able to access, filter, and download data from various sources in our region. On the lower left panel, the Data Explorer reveals the density of the data that is available. On the upper right panel, which is perhaps a little harder to read, but the Data Explorer lists several of the organizations from which data will be available. A note here is that this tool, this very promising tool, is now at the internal beta testing phase for those more technically inclined. Next slide, please. So the previous slide was about integrating the data, addressing the issue of fragmentation. Now, what about responding to the requirements? In response to the requirements of the aquaculture industry, CIOOS is developing the Baines Sound Monitor. This tool is designed for aquaculture growers and brings together real-time ocean monitoring and our understanding of shellfish biology so that growers can make operational decisions regarding the likes of ocean acidification or heat waves. Next slide, please. Another example of a response to requirements is the development of the Strait of Georgia current application. The surface current data over the Strait of Georgia, as in this slide, is derived from the array of land-based radar stations, or CODAR, that are operated by ONC. So with further developments in the years ahead, this application should become a vital tool for safe navigation and maritime response. Next slide, please. So another accomplishment over the last 3 years in CIOOS has been the development and finalization of our 5-year strategic plan covering to the period 2021 to 2026. This plan is based on 4 themes, and the very first one, of course, is partnership, as summarized on this slide. And this is actually why we're here today, to expand the knowledge and the awareness of CIOOS to the broader community, in line with the theme of strengthening the partnerships for the years ahead. Next slide, please. There are 3 more additional themes, respectively focused on the curation of the data, theme 2, the development of tools, products, and applications, theme 3, and I've described a few of these tools earlier, and also the prediction of future states of Canada's ocean spaces, relating to modeling and various modeling applications. So we have this strategic plan that covers the period 21 to 26, which informs the development of CIOOS, but also, interestingly enough, this strategic plan, at least in its aspirational form, matches pretty well all the subsystems and themes from other strategic plans in other advanced ocean observing systems elsewhere in the world. So it's a good fit. It's a good development for the strategic plan of CIOOS to be able to compare, at least partially, to other ocean observing systems in the world. So the next slide, please. Last week, actually, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans released the report of the Canada-wide consultations on the blue economy. And it was interesting to note in the report that the need to connect ocean data from all sources and the importance of ocean data for a competitive ocean blue economy was clearly emphasized. So let me conclude this part by with a question. So how will we get organized in the Pacific region to realize the full potential of ocean observation for the blue economy? Next slide and last slide, please. So this is a summary of all the ways that you can contact, investigate, and explore CIOOS. So let's use this opportunity to start the conversation, and we are awaiting for your input and feedback for the years ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Denis, for that very interesting presentation. It's fascinating to hear the role that CIOOS plays in the global ocean observation ecosystem and how important that is in bringing together these disparate data sources so that we can derive better understanding from them. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jan Newton, who is joining us today as the Executive Director of the Northwest Association of Networked Ocean Observing Systems, NANOOS, the U.S. CIOOS Regional Association for, sorry, my apologies there, for Pacific Northwest. She's the co-director of the Washington Ocean Acidification Center and the co-chair of the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. Dedicated to understanding the effects from climate and humans on water, she is currently working with colleagues at the University of Washington and NOAA to assess the status of ocean acidification in local waters. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm really pleased to tell you about what's going on in what I'll call Canada South in the Pacific Northwest United States. And so my talk is a little bit going across scales from very local within NANOOS through national to global and thinking about those linkages. I want to acknowledge our beautiful logo, which was drawn for us by a Tsimshian tribal member working at the University of Washington, and its meaning is explained on our website, which you can see the link for. So before I talk about NANUS, let's talk a little bit about the United States CIOOS. We call it CIOOS with a long I. And so this was conceived of initially by Congress and then authorized. Keys are, it's a national regional partnership, much like CIOOS, to provide new tools, forecasts, and to integrate that ocean information. So you're going to hear similar plot, different actors as I continue this talk. CIOOS funds coastal observing infrastructure, modeling efforts, products, and the connections to users. But it was conceived of to think about what do the users' needs are and go backwards. We've seen payoff from the components being greater than the parts individually through the production of reports like this. The CIOOS Association led to collect all of the CIOOS associations thinking about detecting the coastal climate signal, which is at a different scale than the global climate scale signal. So here you see the actors. We are made up of 17 federal agencies. NOAA is the lead. CIOOS is led through the National Ocean Service, a program office there. And you see 11 regional associations distributed throughout the United States. Now, these regional associations, as I mentioned, our bread and butter is to do that observations, what we call end-to-end observations, forecast modeling, data management, user products, outreach, and to do that by engaging with the diversity of local stakeholders. And so that is what's so great about these regional associations is that they're place-based. But because we are a system, a national system, we can assure consistent national capability. And every regional association has gone through a process to become federally certified, which means that our data servicing and our governance practices are codified, open, and have integrity. A lot of what we do is leverage and link, taking what exists, knowing what the needs are, and making more from the sum of the parts. So now I'm going to shift back to NANUS. And so NANUS is, we've been originally conceived in 2003. So we've been around 19, almost 20 years. First thing we did is really take assessment of all of the maritime regions and what the factors were, as well as the regional user groups and what those needs were. And from that, then we integrated existing observing infrastructure as well as optimize our requests for new observing infrastructure, which you see here. This is a conceptual graphic for our current 5-year cooperative agreement of what we would like to build out. So some of this exists, some of it does not. What you don't see is the modeling and also the products. And so within our 5 areas of emphasis, climate and weather, coastal hazards, including things like tsunami roll up and therefore effective evacuation strategies, ecosystem assessment like hypoxia and ocean acidification, harmful algal blooms, fisheries and biodiversity, which is an area we'd like to expand our operations, and then maritime operations. Within those areas of emphasis, we have been thinking about how to serve our user needs. So we have a data explorer. This is, it's called the NANUS Visualization System. We abbreviate it NVS. This is our general data explorer, and here you can actually see data from a National Science Foundation buoy, part of the OOI, Ocean Observatory Initiative campaign. And so you see the real-time output of different variables shown here is chlorophyll, we've worked to make this sophisticated so you can also see model output. And so here's output from a live ocean model that Dr. Parker McCready at the University of Washington produces. We also have Susan Allen at UBC's Salish Sea model, a host of models. And then what's fantastic is the ability to compare. So down here in this timeline, you're seeing the observations and the model prediction. So we know that that's what some users want: real-time data, models, comparisons, but those are our pretty sophisticated users. And if we're thinking about serving society's needs, we found that that data explorer was limited, and we focused on what we call user-focused apps for different topics, as you see here. So for instance, a recreational boater does not need to know about chlorophyll, but maybe a tuna fisher does. And so we've worked with the community in each of these cases to refine an app and tailor it to their needs. Here is an example of a Maritime Operations App. But what I want to say, and I'm covering a lot of material quickly, is you see these quotes from different captains from the Columbia River bar pilots and from a boating law administrator about the service that NANUS is doing to provide a place where people can see disparate types of data in an intuitively easy way to understand. And so these kinds of quotes let us know that we're doing our job correctly. They're also very compelling to Congress, quite honestly. It's one thing to go in there as a scientist saying, we need an ocean observing system. But when you have your constituents saying, this is really useful, that's very powerful. Okay, now I want to step back and talk about the importance of that user interaction. And this beautiful graphic is from a paper led by Melissa Iwamoto during the Ocean OBS 19 time. It's a paper in Frontiers in Marine Science. You can find it, the URL is there, but it's probably pretty easy to find, and you can find it from the NANUS website. These steps identify the user needs, continue to design and refine the data products with the users, and have that iterative engagement. That's really the essence. And this is a message that we're carrying across to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainability. There was already a workshop that the Consortium for Ocean Leadership led on this topic with participants from around the world. So this local to global scale. So here you're seeing NANUS, you're seeing US CIOOS, and you're seeing CIOOS there with CIOOS as well as US CIOOS. And I really want to take a moment to underscore the value of the local scale in a global context, as well as the value of global compilation of local scales. And I think both of those are really what's critical. And therefore, our ocean observing systems need to be able to go backwards and forwards. Here is an example of one payoff. NANUS developed an ocean acidification data portal working with shellfish growers in our region in Washington and Oregon, and primarily. And then that same technology was used by GOON, the Global OA Observing Network, now on a global scale. And now those stakeholders are the people who, the nations who are reporting to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 14.3.1 on marine acidity. And now GOON has organized a UN Ocean Decade endorsed program known as Ocean Acidification Research for Sustainability, OARS. And so this payoff of taking that local scale and bringing it to a global stage is really powerful. We actually had another one that was focused just on North America. And here I'm showing you data display from Hakai Institute of their data on ocean acidification. This is CO2. And really some substantial partnerships that NANUS has enjoyed working with not only CIOOS, but also various member institutions in Canada. So we're really thankful for that. So with that, I want to end on this last slide. I mentioned the decade. the United States responded by encouraging people to become Nexus organization. Well, what is a Nexus organization? Well, I take it literally, that connection. And so NANUS became a Nexus organization. We aim to connect the dots of regional issues within a global framework. And so we are offering that as a platform and strive to also work with others across the Decade programs to connect the user community. I think that's one of the strengths that we've learned from NANUS over the years. So with that, I'll say thank you. And I know we're going to have a discussion, but I will end that there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Jan. It was really fascinating to learn more about NANUS and, especially how you convert that raw data into data products that meet a wide range of user needs, from surfers to tuna fishermen. So thank you. Well, it gives me great pleasure to present our final speaker, David Fissel. David is a co-founder and senior scientist at ASL Environmental Sciences Incorporated, based in Victoria, BC. He's been involved in many physical oceanography and sea ice studies within Canadian and international waters. He has authored about 40 peer-reviewed journal papers and well over 100 conference papers. David also founded the ASL Ocean Instrumentation Division in the 1990s. He has served on the boards and committees of many scientific and industry organizations in Canada, and he's a member of Coast's Advisory Board. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Julie. And yeah, I'm going to address ocean observations from perhaps a broader perspective. Going beyond one or a group of observation systems. And so let's start with, we'll go to the next slide after my title slide here. And we'll start by looking at ocean observations and the sustainable blue economy. So to start with, let's look at why and what the importance of ocean observations are, and I put up here some points from the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. I won't read them all, but we've already, previous speakers have touched on some of these, climate change and forecasting of weather and ocean status and so on. But I guess at the highest level, observations feed scientific studies, and those combined generate knowledge about the ocean, and that knowledge of the ocean is what we require to make the best decision about ocean activities and managing the oceans. But I think we also want to remind ourselves that there are other ways of realizing ocean knowledge, and that includes indigenous traditional environmental knowledge. And on this slide in the lower right, I've taken a slide from a recent talk where you can see the scientific method of Western science, but you can see how that can be complemented by traditional knowledge from both contemporary and long-term multi-generation traditional information of indigenous groups. So I wanted to touch on that, and then we'll go to the next slide. So ocean observations have, there are many types and many organizations and many end users, and we've already heard quite a bit about this. So the types of ocean observations are very numerous, but in some ways it comes down to there's a difference between at the surface and subsurface. At the surface, satellites can play a big role. Subsurface, we really depend on in situ instruments. I've listed here some of the many types of organizations that are making ocean observations. We've already heard about some of these. I think that's fair to say they're dominated by government and universities, but private companies and nonprofits play a big role, as increasingly indigenous and community groups do. And then the end users, there's many end users, many applications, and from scientific research studies, government requirements in terms of regulatory activities and developing policies and laws, and many organizations of different types that are dealing with the safe and efficient operations in the ocean and environmental protection, and then Indigenous peoples and community groups and the general public. So in the next slide, I want to now sort of zoom in on one particular sector involved in ocean observations, and this is ocean science and technology companies. And these companies develop and manufacture advanced ocean in situ instruments and measurement platforms. And essentially these instruments and platforms are widely used by all the different players that are making ocean observations. But they come out of largely, the players here are small and medium-sized enterprises, and these groups of companies are organized in geographic clusters. And on this slide, I've put up the logos and the specialty of these types of companies right here in our local Southern Vancouver Island Ocean Science and Tech Cluster. And this is not all of them. There's many missing here, but I only had so much room on the slide. But there are dozens of companies right here on Southern Vancouver Island, and those companies generate jobs for many hundreds of people. So that's our cluster. And now on the next bullet here, you can see that, yes, there are additional Canadian clusters in the BC Lower Mainland. There's a group of companies in Ontario, in Quebec cluster, and then separate clusters in Nova Scotia and in Newfoundland and Labrador. And beyond these ocean science and tech instrument companies and platform companies, there's also consulting and surveying companies that make extensive use of ocean observations to support marine monitoring and activities. And there's marine logistics and transportation companies that provide further support. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk about one particular application, which is marine environmental studies for industry and government that are carried out by companies like I've just talked about. And so these are ocean measurement programs, which include marine consulting, surveying, and engineering companies, as well as the ocean science and tech companies. They carry out studies for environmental regulatory assessments of proposed marine development activities. And this examples are ports and harbors, wastewater discharges, underwater cables, aquaculture and fisheries operations, marine transport, renewable offshore energy, and marine biotechnology. And these studies can be also conducted for government oceanographic research purposes. And besides the companies, there's also nonprofits, organizations that are increasingly important. And we've already heard about the important role of our local Hakai Institute in ocean observations. And if we go to the next slide, this is a bit of a look at old historical ocean observations, which I think sometimes we tend to neglect, but I'm talking about observations from 50 or more years ago. These are very important because the ocean varies on timescales that go well beyond now and the immediate time frame. They go back over many decades, and to understand the future ocean, we really need to understand the past ocean, because it's so integral to the way the ocean dynamics and ocean variability works. And so I wanted to mention here just sort of two case studies that we've been involved in. One of these were some activities were carried out quite a while ago now, but it recognized that old ocean observations that were collected well before the computer and digital age are not digital, and they exist in the form of manuscripts that are gathering dust on bookshelves and various increasingly obscure locations. And it's important to use those studies and make them available for science to obtain and convert them to digital format and to prepare the metadata fields for those studies. So we did some work on a series of contracts for DFO that looked at just that for ocean observations for the Canadian Pacific coast and in the Canadian Arctic. And there's some, these are, the results of that work are still available online, and some of, but not all of those data sets were archived by DFO. And then I have another case study I wanted to briefly mention, and this was one of the very first major Arctic international research projects that was carried out in the Western Arctic. It was called AJEX, and it was led by the University of Washington. And this goes back to the mid-1970s. And it was very well done, very seminal study in Arctic oceanography. The data was all archived and sent to the US National Climatic Data Center and to DFO back in the late 70s and early 80s. But some of those data sets were found to be missing a few years ago. Even though they had been archived, they were no longer in the archives. And so we were contacted because we had been involved in preparing the documentation and formatting the data to go into the DFO archive. And fortunately, we were able to find the missing data sets and copies of backup files. We had backups to old 9-track magnetic tapes that were used back then. And but it shows how important it is to have a robust and long-term system for ocean observations. And then the next slide, my last two slides here, just touching on the present. And we've seen greatly increased technology resources that have been brought to bear on ocean observations in the last, especially the last 2 decades, as the previous speakers were talking about. And from the middle of the last century to now, we've evolved from punch cards all the way up to various very high density optical data storage devices, and then the internet cloud data systems. There's been many advances in software and standards, and advances in the oceanographic instrumentation. And there's been the emergence, especially in the last decade or two, of these international, national, and regional organizations for integrated ocean observing systems that we've just heard about. And my last slide is the next one. Yeah, and it's the just taking a look at the future now. In terms of increased ocean observations, we need to increase the observations beyond what we've done in the past and at the present, because it is so important for the emerging blue economy. And so some thoughts about future needs: we need ongoing improvements to instruments and platforms. We need to continue to expand the participation and engage more of the smaller, non-traditional organizations going beyond governments and universities, and recognize especially the importance of Indigenous organizations and Indigenous traditional environmental knowledge, and more non-government organizations and more community groups and citizen science. And we need to expand access to ocean observations for everybody. So this gets to improving data archival, make it more robust and accessible, and supporting more types of ocean observations that are routinely archived. And we need to provide more incentives for all ocean observations to be made publicly available via the national and regional data centers. And one suggestion I would have in regard to this is that private organizations that are collecting ocean observations should be required to share all those observations. That's not presently always the case. So I think it should be possible to say that ocean observations that are made for the purposes of environmental monitoring and engineering studies that come under as inputs to public decision-making processes, there should be a requirement that those are shared. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, David, for that presentation. And it is really fascinating to see the important role that industry plays in collecting ocean data and the role that ASL has played. And, having just been in London for Oceanology International last week, it was fascinating to see the variety of companies around the world, but especially the strength we have here in Canada and in the Pacific Northwest. So now I'd like to kick off our panel discussion and invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras. And perhaps we could start about, this is something that each of you has touched on in your presentations, but I'm curious to learn more about the Pacific Northwest unique strengths in ocean observation relative to the rest of Canada and the world. And, perhaps, Denis, we could start with you and, maybe chatting a little bit about what the unique opportunities these strengths open up for the region and what could really be done to invest more in these strengths.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I think I'll give you two examples of what was unique in terms of strength for the Pacific region when we started CIOOS and as we developed CIOOS. The first one is that with organizations such as ONC and HACI that have very deep expertise in the actual operation of ocean observing system, as well as in advanced data management, it was possible to rely on the expertise of these two groups to develop CIOOS during the prototyping years. Of course, it's now time to expand a little bit more, but the key message here is that we have pockets of deep expertise in the maintenance and operation of observing systems, very varied at that. For example, HACI in the coastal and ONC with the Cable Observatory in the deep ocean, and also we have an extremely good relationship with the Institute of Ocean Sciences. And with the likes of the historical data on line P, between these three players, we're covering the coastal, the deep ocean, and the water column. So that's a very rich data environment. And that's, this is what makes oceanographers tick, when you can cover all these dimensions as well as the historical one. So the summary for the strength of the Pacific is that we have pockets of deep expertise. And the opportunity for the future is to continue to rely on these, but expand and engage more parties in these activities. From an international point of view, you've seen in the various slides that this CIOOS is in Pacific, but we are sandwiched between the United States to the south and the United States to the north, Washington and Alaska. But if you recall the slide that Jan showed, there's three ocean observing systems starting in Southern California up to Washington. This Southern California observing system, Central and Northern, and then the NANUS, and then this Alaska ocean observing system. Now between all these is CIOOS. So that makes 5 ocean observing systems along an uninterrupted 5,000 kilometers from the south of California up to Nome, Alaska. So that's a very unique situation in the world where you have 5 ocean observing systems along such a long uninterrupted segment of the ocean with, that are fairly well supported by their respective governments and organizations. So that opens up a lot of opportunities along this very rich line of ocean observing systems to synergize, to develop common approaches, to complement each other. And I've had the pleasure of participating in a number of discussions with the directors of these 4 ocean observing systems from California to Alaska. And we were able to contemplate what some common goals or interests might be for the future.
Great, thank you so much, Denis. I think that really leads in nicely to some questions that we have from the audience. I'll just read one out from Alex Rubin here. David Fissel has given an excellent rendering of the region's ocean science and technology companies that are involved in developing products and services that relate to the gathering and use of ocean data. How is CIOOS working with this commercial sector in building and implementing its CIOOS Data Explorer? Keeping in mind the profit orientation of private companies, how will these companies be incentivized to share their data and contribute to the CIOOS database? So, and really that can go out to anybody. David, if you want to take that, or Jan or Denis, I think it's a very relevant question to us all.
Well, I can offer a couple of observations. So I've summarized what we have done over the last 3 years, which were the prototype years, which involved a limited number of partners in Hawkeye and ONC and a bit of iOS, even though iOS it's a government, so it's not part of a government-funded program, but certainly the relationship with the scientists there allow us to access the data. So as far as the commercialization, I guess, of the data, that is something that we will start to think about in a post-prototype phase. Now we have essentially for CIOOS over the last 3 years, we have demonstrated the feasibility of developing such a system in Canada, where the environment from a funding point of view is entirely different from what Jan showed us in the States, for example, from what exists in Australia, for example. So the answer to this extremely important question is entirely, this important question by Alex is entirely open. And the answer is probably one of the first things that we will have to start trying to formulate as we move beyond the prototype stage and start to engage, as we are doing today, with the broader marine community. By the way, I read about COAST in an issue of Douglas magazine a couple of years ago, and it said it was led by an office in Sydney. So I went and knocked on Alex's door, and that's where it all began. Thank you, Alex.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, I think there's many exciting things to come. And really, I guess maybe we can talk about ocean observations systems globally, and what are some of the current barriers to collaboration across these observation networks, and how can these barriers be overcome, and what opportunities exist if we're successful. And maybe Jan, I can turn that one over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Julie. I just want to say, commenting on the first question, we really view CIOOS as a sister RA. Mention of CIOOS is in our governance documents. They're on our board. And I feel like a strength of the Pacific Canada and Pacific Northwest US is just a spirit of cooperation. And so we're really thankful for that. So what are barriers? It's kind of the usual: money, time, communication, right? And so how do we get around those barriers? I, for one, am very excited and gratified to see the emphasis on this UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainability. So, yes. And I know some people are a bit critical, saying like, well, there's no money there, but it's providing us the opportunity to really focus and drill down and say, what do we need to do for the ocean, for ocean science for sustainability? I feel like we all live with the ocean off of our shore, and most people don't give it another thought, right? And so if we, as the ocean science community, can build stronger partnerships, and I really appreciated what David had to say about Indigenous partners. And I think that's another thing that differentiates our geographical region, is that we do have a much stronger acknowledgement of First Nations, tribal nations, and a much more demonstrated presence working with those communities as partners. and taking all of us to really put the focus on what we're learning from the oceans and how critical that is. And that kind of brings me to another thing, is the power of long-term time series. David, you also reflected on this, and Denis, you mentioned line P. I cut my teeth on data from line P in grad school, the power of those data sets to be able to show the world the changes that we as scientists know are happening, but to be able to really show it there in demonstratable products, as well as those user-honed applications that really harken to, like, I can use this, and we don't just need to be shown the doom and gloom of climate change. We also need to know when it's good to go surfing and when it's good to, maybe you're going to have a safe boating adventure, right? And so really making it so that the ocean is more of a partner to us all. And so for that, I'm hoping that the money from foundations and others will come to light, but it's the communication, it's the time, it's the focus. So I'm a big believer in this focus, and I'm thankful for you organizing this event to shine a light on this. So I guess I'll say that I'm optimistic about that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big optimist as well, and I think shining a brighter light on our oceans and the importance of data and what we can do with that data is extremely important. I just want to read a question from Dwight Owens about what are the needs and opportunities for skilled and knowledgeable early career professionals to find good jobs in ocean science and tech sector in Pacific Canada and in the NANUS territory. And I think maybe, David, be interesting from your perspective, from the industry side, and as well from, the government side.
Yeah, so well, there certainly is a great need for recruiting people into our industry, whether it's related to developing instruments for more and more advanced measurements in the ocean, or for the analysis of these data sets, and that certainly applies to our company and many other companies. And I think that is so I think there are great opportunities there, and it's something I'm sure all of our companies are striving to do. And sometimes we run, we run into shortages. So anybody who's interested in a career in this area, I think there's unbounded opportunities for them, and we need, maybe our companies need to do better at promoting the opportunities that are there. And another important part of that is to make sure that we have, and something we've been working on through ABCMI and COAST, is increasing the diversity and making sure we have and expanding our diversity of our all the people in our organizations, and I'm sure this applies to others. So yeah, I think it's the opportunities are unlimited right now, and we should make sure people choose ocean science and technology as a career, as much as we can anyway.
Julie, may I add a little bit to this? I think from my experience, I've been in this sector for a long time, and I've had an epiphany at one point when I realized that data curation, or the management of data, is a science, and it requires experts in data management. I've done some data management in the past, which consisted of storing my data on floppy disks, and that did not cut it, so certainly we have to recognize that that for proper ocean integration, we need proper data curation, and that requires experts, people who are specifically trained. And that is, and I'm saying this for the people who, for the people who are involved, this is an obvious thing to say, but for people less aware of this, it's important to recognize that data management and data curation is a science on its own, and requires very highly trained personnel to do that. And we needed biologists, physicists, chemists, geologists for oceanography. We also need data managers.
I'll just chime in that I think it's absolutely critical and essential. You know, the students and the new minds. I want to give a shout out to Neopar, who has done really a great job with their training programs. HQP emphasis, it's very inspiring, but that is where our future lies, and really look forward to the new minds that will contribute to ocean science. Thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, as the CEO of Open Ocean Robotics, I can say, you know, we're actively hiring, looking for skilled people, and there are so many opportunities in the sustainable blue economy. So I think it's a very exciting time. There are a lot of great careers, and would certainly encourage people to pursue a profession in that area. So I'm afraid that's it. We're out of time. I'd very much like to thank our excellent panelists, Denis, Jen, David, for their insights today, and of course the audience for all your questions and for participating. I'd also like to let you know that CIOOS Talks is a series, and the next talk will be on April 27th. So you can find out more about that on canadacoast.ca, and there you'll also find other details such as additional upcoming events, recordings of past talks, and information about becoming a member. Associate membership is free, so do join us in building Pacific Canada's hub for a sustainable blue economy. Thank you, everyone.